So today we're going to talk about the 305. It's going to be a similar video to the one I did recently about the 104. I'm just going to go through what's in the exam. Obviously in line with Microsoft's NDA, I'm not going to tell you what the questions are going to be, but from the exam page we can get a pretty good understanding of the kinds of things you're going to be asked. And I'll try and make it a much shorter video. I'm not going to go through all the practice tests and how to prepare for the exam because we've done that, and if you want to see that you can go back and have a look at some of my other videos. I'm just going to go through the exam page and have a look at the study guide and talk about the different topics that are on the exam and the kinds of things that you should probably focus your efforts on when you're studying. So 305 is the architect exam. It's easier and harder than other Microsoft exams in equal measure in that it's not like a technical exam where you're going to be asked how to fix things. They're not going to talk about why something is done a certain way from a technical perspective necessarily. It's more about what solutions you would use and why you would use them. So you may get a question where there's 4 answers, all of the answers are correct and all of the answers meet the requirement that you have in the question, but Microsoft are looking for the best answer. So there'll be a little keyword somewhere in the question which means that one of the answers is better than the other ones, and a certain solution will sort of meet the objective in a better way to the other solutions. So it might be the lowest cost option. You may have a question where the storage tiers are hot, cool, and archive, and you could potentially pick between hot and cool because both of them would work. You get instant access to the data and everything else, but you want the most cost-effective option, so you have to pick cool. So you've got to be a little bit careful because sometimes it can be a bit frustrating to sort of think, well, oh, I was right on that question, but they wanted a different answer to the one that I gave anyway, even though I was correct. So what you tested on, basically Azure in its entire breadth, so compute, networking, storage, monitoring, security. There's a lot of databases on this exam. There's a lot of SQL. There's a lot of migrating SQL to 365. How would you do it? What tools would you use? There's a lot of what different SKUs you would use for SQL. So, do you want elastic databases? Do you want a managed instance? Do you want SQL Server on a VM? So, be familiar with the different parts of SQL Server. So, if you've got the different plugins for data integration or reporting, things like that, you need to know whether they're going to be compatible with managed instances, whether you need a dedicated IaaS box which has got SQL on it, things like that. SQL was a big part of this exam. Storage was a big part of this exam. I didn't see that much compute, but there's a fair range of compute topics that are covered. Things like VM sizing, which VMs are burstable, P series for burstable, difference between D general purpose, E memory optimized, F compute optimized, or CPU optimized. What the N series does, things like that, and also different naming conventions for things. So like the CPU optimized ones also are called compute optimized. The memory optimized ones, memory optimized. Things like that. So it's just about sort of having a good understanding of everything that Azure offers and when you would use it, rather than necessarily how you would configure it. So a little bit of networking, different types of VPN. When would you use an express route? An example of something they might ask is something like you've got clients that connect into an on-prem network which has got some servers in. Your on-prem network connects to Azure. What type of VPN would you use for the on-prem to Azure? What type of VPN would you use for the clients connecting in? You're not going to give every client an express route into the office or an express route direct to Azure. You want a point to site for the clients, and then you want express route up to Azure, or you want a site to site for Azure. What resources would you need to connect that? You'd need an NSG, you'd need a local network gateway. both configured in Azure. Also things like how on-prem servers talk to Azure. So obviously I've mentioned the express route, I've mentioned the point-to-site VPN, but also application proxy, what different components you need for application proxy to work, where you would install them. Some stuff on AD Connect, what's pass-through authentication, what's password hash sync, things like that. Conditional access as well. The only sort of minor technical point I think that is in here regarding conditional access is how you actually configure policies. So, it goes back to the 102 and the 104 and stuff. What's a grant policy, what's a block policy, what level would you apply it at, things like that. So I say there's not an enormous amount of technical knowledge in here. It's mostly just knowing what the products are, what they do, differences between web application firewall, front door, application gateways, know all of that stuff inside out because that is fairly heavily tested. As far as exam setup goes, it's the standard sort of, there's a case study, there's some questions, and then there's the sort of yes, no, does this meet the solution questions where you can't go back. So it's a very standard Microsoft exam. I did watch the prep videos for this one. I don't normally, but I thought they were quite good and worth checking out. The study guide I think is good. Obviously, look at the updates for the exam. It's updated in January 24, so not a particularly recent update between when I took it and when I studied for it. And only minor changes to the actual exam. So these are the skills and the percentages. So identity governance and monitoring is 25 to 30%. Logging, when would you use a log analytics workspace? When would you use stream analytics? Data factory, data lake, what all of that stuff does. Data storage, again, that's your data factory, data lake stuff that I've already mentioned. Storage accounts, when would you use archive tier, when would you use hot tier, what's premium storage, difference between selling a premium SSD and stuff like that. SQL questions that may come up on that, where would you put your logs? There's an SQL caching intricacy somewhere. So with caching, you can set up read writes and write caches and stuff on disks. Azure has some specific requirements around whether you cache the log drive, whether you cache the data drive, things like that. So just understand that, or at least know how to get there from Microsoft Learn when you're in the exam, because you might get questions on that. That's a pretty good one based on some of the content here. Business continuity, backup, disaster recovery. When would you just back up SQL logs? When would you use Azure Backup? What is a recovery services vault? What is Azure Site Recovery? How can you get your data from on-prem to the cloud? So Databox versus Databox Heavy, how much data is required for each one? Again, all fact-based stuff that you can look up on Learn during the exam if you've got the time. I used the full time for the exam. I literally had a minute left, and I spent a long time in the case study on Learn, double checking all of my answers, and regretted it. So while you do have the Learn access, I don't necessarily recommend using it for the whole exam. Don't double check your answers. If you've got the knowledge, just be confident in using that knowledge. Compute and application, that's fine. There's a lot of differences between queue storage and the messaging stuff, which I don't really deal with on a day-to-day basis, so I struggled on those, and the API integrations as well. It's not really part of my role. So, and then migrations, as I've said, what AZ copy, know what that is, know what Databox is. Azure Migrate as well for VMs, understand that, and just know when you'd recommend this stuff. When would you lift and shift a VM to the cloud versus migrating it into a SaaS solution, things like that. And then load balancing, we've mentioned front door versus application gateway, web application firewall, that kind of stuff. Study resources here that Microsoft recommend. You've got all the documentation, which again I recommend familiarizing yourself with the Learn environment where everything is. I know a lot of people will go into the exam and pull this page up so that they've got the shortcuts in here for Learn while they're taking the exam. And then also you've got the practice test. So I did a video a couple of days ago about practice tests and how to get to them. You go to the exam page, and then down here we've got take a free practice assessment. You can see your previous attempts, so you can tell that you're sort of getting closer to passing the exam. And they're really good. So if we just pick a random answer, check your answer, gives you why your answer was correct or incorrect, and then it also tells you which page to go to learn more. So say I'd got this question wrong, I didn't understand what the recommended answer was, I can then go off to the Learn article, read about it, and I always recommend absolutely hammering the free practice test that Microsoft give you, because the questions are written by Microsoft to give you a very good understanding of how they ask the questions, and a lot of this content is in the exam. They're not going to be word for word, but you may get a different question where the answer is API management instead of load balancer or whatever. So if you know when each of these answers will apply, you can then use that to pick out the question. So you're looking for keywords in questions, basically. Stateless, increase and decrease automatically based on CPU usage. It's not based on number of users connecting to an app or anything, it's based on the CPU usage. So it's scale set. So with these questions, it's helpful to look at them and say, look, we've got 3 separate environments. We need to be able to roll back. Which one of these will allow you to do that? Well, it's not going to be DNS, is it? So yeah, just familiarise yourself with these questions when the answers apply, differences between things like front door and traffic manager, as I said, and you'll be fine. It is a hard exam. I'm not going to pretend it's an easy one, but it's just the one exam to get the architect cert, as far as I remember. So once you've got it, it's done. You can do your yearly renewal, and you're certified. So yeah, good luck. If you've got any specific questions about the exam content or the exam, reach out to me and I'll see if I can help. I mentioned in the last video that I'm also tutoring, so if you want me to help you prepare for the exam, I can do that. So hopefully this has been helpful. Thank you very much for watching.